All of my knowledge of Sonic came, first of all, with the first briefing I had for Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog when we were invited in to pitch premises. At that time, we were shown 3 or 4 levels of the video game on a video projection. We didn't play the game. And it was it didn't really connect with me, I think. It was sort of hard for me to see what that was going to be. But then there was a Bible, and that was Len Jansen. He was the one who created the Bible for it. The Bible is the part of animation that tells the writers who the characters are, what the interactions are between them, what the interrelationships are, what the world is, what their universe is like. And he, I think, changed a lot of the elements of Sonic to things that were more screen friendly. It was became more of an animation, almost feature film quality. And he worked with a number of writers in the first season of Saturday Morning. And then the second year, we were talking with Len, and he invited us in to take a look at the episodes from the earlier year, so that we could do an analysis of, what was good, what was bad, what worked, what didn't, what characters needed to be tweaked, what needed to be done. And in that conversation and in that session where we watched all 13 episodes right in a row, somehow or other the idea surfaced, wouldn't it be interesting to take a 13-episode series and arc it in the same way as a motion picture?
Study the Doomsday Project information I sent you. I expect your analysis at the next command meeting.
All his commanders are in on it, Sonic. That worries me.
Doomsday Project? Sounds mondo ugly.
We had a week from beginning to end of a script. And so that was what I was focused on. And because there was so much to do within that week just for the script alone, because animation differs from regular television writing or feature film writing in that we actually direct in the script. We call all the shots. If you take a look at one of the scripts from Sonic, you'll see that it's angle on, insert shot, reverse angles. I mean, we're doing all the things that a director traditionally does because we have to set it up so that they know exactly what they're drawing. So even in the descriptions, you'll see description blocks that are that big that you don't see in live action because we have to say, this is in the shot, this da-da-da-da, give the background and all of that. Len had strict guidelines for every episode. Number one, each episode, with the exception of Blast of the Past Part 1 and 2, had to stand on its own merits so that if somebody just dropped in on the series and happened to watch one episode, it would still keep their attention and they wouldn't feel like they'd just come into an ongoing soap opera. So we had to have a good beginning, middle, and end, for every story. The other thing was he insisted that we have wins and losses so that we had a higher emotional quotient to the show, so that people became involved in the show. So it wasn't always the freedom fighters winning. Sometimes they lost things, they lost people. There's a one moment where a freedom fighter was lost, and we have a shot from behind showing Sally and Sonic sitting on a log in the ring grotto.
I should have listened to you, Sal. I was a total bonehead.
But Uncle Chuck's gonna be a spy for us. That's cool, right?
Yeah, except he has to live in Bogus City. I should have waited till everything was ready. I just should have waited.
Yes, we know that, Sonic.
And she puts her arm around him. But I get emotional, I get verklempt. But it's like, we really got into the characters, we got into their emotions, and we, again, with that whole edict of Len's, I'm not going to call it an edict, I'm going to call it a guideline, that there had to be wins and losses. It took a whole fabric of the animation that we were doing into something that was from cloth to velvet. So that you actually believed what was happening. And I think that's what's kept the series alive for so long, is that it's believable. In fact, in the middle of the series, while we were writing it, and just the first 2 episodes had been released, we got this letter from a guy who was somewhere in the Midwest, and it was a 5-page letter, and Robbie London, who's one of the executives at Deke, passed it on to me. And it was a 5-page letter on how we were a metaphor for the freedom of the United States. And it was very flattering. And it was from a man who was probably 45, 50 years old. And so I think we actually touched a chord by looking at some of the universal truths, which is that freedom is good and that tyranny is bad. And then we worked the human element of that, although these were creatures, of course. But they were, in my mind, Sonic's a human and Sally's a human. And these are all characters that are as alive to me as the people I know. I can't remember the names of the artists since it's been a few years, but I grew to know them only because they would literally come up to my office and drag me down to the third floor to show me what they'd done, particularly when we did Blast to the Past. We had given them descriptions of the floating island. We had given them descriptions of the palace where they were able to go back in time. We described it as M.C. Escher-ish type of artwork, and they were so proud. And that was the beginning of my relationship with all of these people wanting to show me what they were doing. And they would bring me color Xeroxes so that by the time at the end of the series, our walls were covered with color Xeroxes. We always have the characters up because you want to be able to see them. And we have character packs which show the different expressions you can choose from in case you want to designate something specifically. But we very rarely use those. We just simply wrote it as emotionally as possible. And Ron Myrick was the one who breathed life into the way they moved and how they were in collaboration with Len, who was a maniac on the storyboards. We would get a storyboard. It's about this wide and about this high, and it's, legal size or a little bit longer, and this thick. It's like a comic book, and it shows the camera angles, it shows the action, it shows where everything that happens, shows this, the dialogue where it appears. And Len would pour through those. He did that, I did that later when I story edited, but I would see him there at 8 o'clock at night going through page after page making notes. No, this should be this should be that. And then he and Ron Myrick would huddle, and they made just brilliant decisions, I feel. Because I can go back and watch those episodes and they feel as fresh to me today as the first time we watched them. And I find myself being emotionally affected by a number of the moments in those episodes. Sonic the Hedgehog ran into problems almost from day one. Number one, we were up against the white-hot Power Rangers. And so we were exactly opposite them in most of the time slots where it was appearing. Number two was the fact that they were preempting us for sports, for Saturday morning sports, football games and things. So sometimes we were on and sometimes we weren't. So we sort of have a Star Trek-like reputation. I'm not comparing us to Star Trek, but if you remember, Star Trek was not popular when it was on and became popular after it wasn't on because people caught up with it. And it was after it went into syndication, I think, or when they started rerunning it, is when Sonic really started to take off. That particular season, it didn't do as well in the ratings as it could have, and also, it had trouble developing a viewership because it kept bouncing around. The third thing is that the head of ABC Children's Programming left at the end of the year. And the new people came in. I heard the phrase, I don't know if they actually said it, but I heard the phrase percolate down, a new broom sweeps clean. And so Sonic was just simply taken off the slate. And of course, as all the fans and people who love the series know, we left the second season on a cliffhanger, anticipating doing a third season. And so I think that may have contributed in part to the longevity of the fan base. I want to say this about the fans, is that they are incredible, and they have been flattering, they've been wonderful, and they've also been fun. It's interesting that I think about 6 or 7 years ago, I did a chat online with them, and the questions were predictably young because the fans were still young. And I just did one this year as well, which was supposed to go an hour and went about 2 hours or so. And all of a sudden, I had a group of people who were in their 20s, and the questions became way more sophisticated. But it's been very gratifying to have this fan base, and they are just amazing. I can't say enough good about them.
No more Robotnik. Too bad.
What? Too bad?
Hey, without a villain, what are heroes gonna do?
You'll always be my hero, Sonic Hedgehog.
When Sonic was canceled, I was disappointed. It was, I was still working with Len at the time, and we were working on a couple of other things. But it was, when you leave any task unfinished, when you've left anything on a high note, and you're ready to jump back in, and it's suddenly taken away from you, you're always going to be disappointed. I didn't realize that disappointment would be carried forward through a fan base for 10 years. And still the cry is out there. But as they say in Hollywood, which is true, everything can change with one phone call. I mean, my dream is that Sega or Deke or whoever else is up there decides one day, you know what, this worked. Let's do the third season. The third season is something that I feel very strongly about and always have. Over the years, I've had an awful lot of fans asking me questions about, well, what it would be like, what would it be like? And for my own edification, I've actually pretty much plotted out the entire third season. Now, this is not endorsed by Deke, this is not endorsed by Sega, this is just something I did, and I've never released it. But I had a number of things that were happening. I can share a couple of them. One thing that would definitely be, or actually is in my mind, a part of the season 3 is the ascendance of Tails. Because in the episode that we had where they were going after the deep power stones, there was a whole 3 or 4 page sequence of Tails being trained by Sonic. And, you started to see that first relationship build between them as this young adolescent was coming into his own. And unfortunately for time, it had to be cut. And so that would have been developed in the third season. And one of the surprises would be that Tails would find himself with some incredible power that he hadn't expected. And of course, it would be introduced comedically, with some sort of great disaster happening that Sonic would have to rescue. I was also in the mind of developing a love triangle for a short period of time between one of the freedom fighters and Sally and Sonic. And Snively, of course, this is stuff that we've talked about before, would rise to ascendancy. And as I've told the fans, the eyes that they saw at the end of the episode were Nagas, the sorcerer, who was in the void, and who has, at that moment, when the big power rift happened, captured Robotnik. And he is definitely going to be having an awful lot of fun with him. So those are some of the elements, and there's quite a bit more. We fell in love with what we were doing, which is really unusual. It wasn't just a job, it was truly an adventure for us as much as it was an adventure that became something on the screen. Everybody would gather to watch the footage as though they were getting an Easter basket. And they would get pizza and they would sit around. And instead of just 1 or 2 people reviewing the footage and taking care of it, it was an entire, the entire assemblage of people and cheering when it was good and booing when it was bad. So it was a group effort. A typical day on Sonic the Hedgehog was both intense and fun. Len is a prankster. And it wasn't unusual to hear the door open behind me. 5 grapes would bounce off both my head and the surrounding walls, and the door would slam, and I'd hear footsteps running away. So we had an ongoing fruit fight going for the entire series, to the point that when we left our offices at the end of that year, the people who were coming in, I remember as I was carrying all my stuff out in a box, I heard one of the story editors who was going to use that office, and they were demanding that the place be repainted. So we left the place in just a bit of a mess, but the fun was worth it. My advice to aspiring writers starts with a quote by Mark Twain, who said, "Write without pay for a year. If by the end of that year no one has offered money, go back to sawing wood, which is what you were intended for." That I say facetiously, but it actually is sort of true. Writing is something that is a hard craft to develop. You have to go through the steps. You need creative writing courses. You need to read and read and read. You need to read scripts. You need to watch movies. You need to watch cartoons. You need to watch whatever format it is that you want to write in. Then you need to get your hands on a copy of a script. Google animation scripts, you'll find them. Learn what the format is. Write a sample script. Now, animation, even though it's a lot smaller than it used to be, is still more open than most areas of writing. And you can still find story editors that will accept phone calls. And then you can say, may I send you a sample script? And oftentimes the answer will be yes. Now, my experience has been when I went on to become a story editor, there aren't very many good writers out there. There are an awful lot of people who don't understand that writing is rewriting, and that you have to be absolutely fastidious in your detail and to make sure that everything hangs together. You see a lot of amateurish mistakes in sample scripts. You see a lot of things that just don't hang together. There are act breaks, and you have to build to those act breaks so that you bring people back after the commercial. You have to know where those are. They have to be an instinctive part. I know that when I took a writing course from a gentleman named Nat Perrin, who's one of the old Hollywood writers, he was talking specifically about comedy, but he said that comedy writers aren't made, they're born. I think that to a certain degree, there are people who are storytellers, and that's the single most important aspect of writing. Everything else is secondary. If you're a good storyteller, you're probably going to be able to turn into a good writer. If you're not a good storyteller, saw wood